It is refreshing right now to see like a new generation of activists, and also to see kind of a shift in consciousness in the American right about Israel and about American empire. So maybe we can talk about that.
Yeah, I'm heartened by all the people who aren't dupes, who just, they see all the propaganda they've been getting about Palestine and they don't buy it. They just reflexively now don't believe what they're told by the New York Times and CNN and the Biden administration, and they reject all of these efforts by Democratic Party hacks to get them to shut up and vote for Biden. And that is a big shift. And maybe we're seeing something similar now on the right, where you have some figures like Candace Owens and Alex Jones. Alex Jones are recently called out what Israel's doing as a genocide. He did that before AOC, which is pretty remarkable. And now Tucker Carlson recently did an interview with Munther Isaac, who's a Palestinian pastor in Bethlehem. And it got a lot of people on the right very upset.
If you wake up in the morning and decide that your Christian faith requires you to support a foreign government blowing up churches and killing Christians, I think you've lost the thread. Just to end on this, if you had a message for Christian leaders in the United States, whether in government or in churches or just citizens who care about the religion and their fellow Christians, what would it be?
It would be to remind them that when the state of Israel was created, it was not created on an empty land. It was created on a land that had millions of indigenous Palestinians there, including Palestinian Christians. And that state they support, that state they celebrated as a fulfillment of prophecy and a sign of God's faith to the Jewish people. For it to become a state, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, including Palestinian Christians, were forced to leave and have never returned. Churches were closed. A friend of mine did a research and counted more than 30 churches that were closed when Israel was created because Palestinians were expelled from the land. Our numbers continue to be in decline. So we're pleading that come and listen, come and talk to us. And my message to Christian leaders right now is there is a very, very brutal war taking place in Gaza, a war that I described using the word genocide, because it's a war that has used even starvation as a mean. And fellow Christians are suffering because of that war. It's time that Christian leaders recognize that wars is not the way, whether in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya. When will we learn that war does not help? When will we take Jesus's words seriously about being peacemakers, about being merciful? There must be other ways. And so it would be an invitation to listen, to learn more, and to avoid very shallow and simplistic perspectives that are not based on scripture itself, but more based on political equations. And I would plea right now, and I will continue to plead that we need to stop this war in Gaza. It's killing many, many children, women, innocent lives. It has to stop. There must be other ways. And as a follower of Christ, we have to pursue the path of peace and justice, and we have to avoid simplistic polarizations, good and evil. Come and listen, come and understand what's happening. And I plead as a Christian pastor from Bethlehem, I plead that you come and listen.
Wow. I mean, just I've known Tucker for years, like when he was a sort of just a voice of the Bush Republicans in Washington. I just still can't believe what I'm seeing.
Yeah. And, Tucker's compatriots on the right were not happy about this. There's been a huge freak out against him. For example, this guy, David Friedman, to was Trump's ambassador to Israel. He says, Tucker, my friend, before the Palestinians took over Bethlehem pursuant to the Oslo Accords, Bethlehem was under Israeli control and its population was 80% Christian. It was one of the centers of the Christian world. Since Oslo and the resulting Palestinian rule, Bethlehem became 80% Muslims, and Christians are afraid. But they don't speak out against the Palestinian Authority because you just can't and survive. Such a malicious lie. First of all, the idea that Bethlehem became 80% Muslim, like, what does he get that from? And that the you can't speak out against the Palestinian. If you speak out against the Palestinian Authority's collaboration with Israel in being a basically like an arm of the occupation, yeah, the Palestinian Authority will crack down on you. But this idea that like the Palestinian Authority is like now like some sort of like Muslim, like running like some sort of like Islamic regime, it cracks down on Christians. It's such a complete joke. They're very secular and have no interest in religious rule. It's a complete invention.
Yeah, I mean this is the talking point of the, ostensibly pro-Trump or right-wing opponents of what Tucker did, is that the Bethlehem, well, it's all the Palestinians' fault. It's the Palestinian Authority that controls it. And I mean, you have to be so submental and have the IQ of a grapefruit to really believe that talking point, because there's a gigantic wall, an apartheid wall, that is impossible to miss in and around Bethlehem that is destroying the Christian community there, along with Israeli raids and settlement construction all around Bethlehem. I've spent a ton of time in Bethlehem. I would always have to go to through what is it, Machzon Shloshim, checkpoint 300. Everybody in Bethlehem knows checkpoint 300. It's horrible. And I'd stand behind all these Palestinians who'd be getting photographed and humiliated going through there. And they'd usually wave me through, but sometimes they'd, scan me as well. And then I'd have to catch a ride to Jerusalem on the other side. And so, you're a Palestinian Christian, you can't get to Jerusalem. You can't celebrate Palm Sunday in Jerusalem. You can't be close to the shrines. You can't really be a Christian in your own land because of that wall. David Friedman is a supporter and I think part-time resident of the Beit El illegal settlement in the West Bank. This guy's part of the problem. He's a human cancer on Palestine, lecturing Tucker. So, I mean, and then you have like all the right-wing Gentiles. I mean, David Friedman's a Jewish Zionist, but you have all the right-wing Gentiles attacking Tucker or Candace Owens as well. It really shows what complete, because these are people who preach America first, but in reality, they're Israel first. Let's be real.
100%. Yeah.
Breitbart, that whole, site. Do you have something from Joel Pollack, who's one of the, original members of Breitbart?
Yes. Apparently he was writing
about this guy.
Yeah, me too. Allow me to respond to Tucker's interview here with Munther Isaac by talking about the facts, rather than speculating about whether Tucker hates Israel or is an anti-Semite. So I'm not going to speculate, but that Tucker is an anti-Semite, but I'm just going to suggest it in a really passive-aggressive way. He says he's concerned about Christians. I'll accept that, but there's no excuse for this. A fact about Bethlehem: Christians used to be a majority there. They're now minority. I'm not sure where they get that from, but anyway, the Palestinian Authority has been Islamizing the city since taking control of Bethlehem 30 years ago. Israeli occupation, he puts occupation in quotes, is hardly the primary issue. Another fact: Bethlehem has become an anti-Semitic city under Palestinian control, far worse to Jews and even to Christians. In 2007, I was told not to speak Hebrew there. In 2023, I was told to remove my yarmulke or cover it with a hat. In the birthplace of Jesus, a Jew. Well, first of all, I'm just going to mute myself while this. Yeah, well, look, I'm sorry if you can't wear your yarmulke, but if you're a member of the settler colony that's terrorizing Palestinians and acting in the name of the Jewish people, it's understandable that maybe people, if this actually happened, I can't take his words on faith, but let's assume that did happen. I can't assume that people who are being terrorized by the Jewish people, by the state that acts in the name of the Jewish people, are going to be receptive to having Jewish people come to visit. I mean, if you don't like that reception, stop terrorizing and stealing their land. It seems pretty self-explanatory. If he's even telling the truth, because by the way, when I visited Bethlehem, I mean, I don't wear a kippah, but it's pretty clear I'm Jewish, and no secret of that. I've never, there's never been the hint of an issue. People just understandably don't like settlers.
Yeah.
I
mean, I got like once I was walking through Silwan, which is an area of occupied East Jerusalem where there's just insane Israeli settler activity. They're hiring private guards. They're physically taking over homes, forcing people out. There's demolitions all the time of people's homes. Some people are forced to demolish their own homes so they don't have to pay you actually have to pay the Jerusalem municipality after they demolish your home, because they say, well, it was illegal. And yeah, some kids threw some little pebbles at me, basically some rocks, because they thought I was a settler, because I was I had a backpack on, and I just I guess I looked like one. And then the adults from the community scared off the kids, and I walked through unmolested. But that's, Joel Pollak's basically just a pure example of entitlement. When he was at Harvard University, he's a huge fraud. When he was at Harvard University, he worshiped Cornel West. I did a piece with Mark Ames about this back in the day. He wanted to be Cornel West's an intern, and he just worshipped him. He participated, I think, in racial justice rallies at Harvard, and he could never really get close to Cornell, so he became a whack job Zionist, and Alan Dershowitz adopted him, because Alan Dershowitz was at Harvard Law School, and would use him kind of as a proxy to go into Harvard classes and interrupt and disrupt on behalf of Israel. He brought in a piece of metal into one class and claimed it was a rocket fired into Sderot, and slammed the piece of metal down on his desk to shut down debate on Israel-Palestine. I mean, that's who he was. And he wound up at Breitbart, and this really says it all about right-wing media. I'm kind of working towards a larger point. Right-wing media that claims to be America first, much of it was actually founded by the Israel lobby, or founded in Israel. Can't find the article right now. If you're listening or watching, you'll easily find it. I think it's by Jim Hoft, and it's about how Breitbart was literally founded in Jerusalem during a meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu and Andrew Breitbart, who is no longer with us because he reached his tweet limit. And several other of the Breitbart hacks. I think Steve Bannon might have been there. And I mean, you look at the relationship between Breitbart and Israel, it's like they literally work for Netanyahu. Netanyahu hires ex-Breitbart journalist Aaron Klein as his campaign chief. This was in 2021. I mean, crazy. They're just owned.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what about Charlie? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, just there's something so just obnoxious about someone like Joel Pollak even setting foot in Bethlehem, let alone complaining about that he can't wear his yarmulke there, if indeed that's what happened. Because can somebody from Gaza or the West Bank, can they go to Tel Aviv? Can they go to their ancestral homes from which their ancestors, or maybe even them, if they were alive during the Nakba, that they were expelled from by Zionist forces? And he's allowed to go wherever he wants because he's an American Jew. He can set foot in Bethlehem, and he has the gall to complain that maybe he got some bad looks because he was wearing his kippah. There's just something so, it's just they're so entitled, and they feel they own a land that they have actually no connection to. But the indigenous people there, who are uncomfortable by the presence of settlers, they're the ones who have to be demonized. And of course, their rights to visit where they want aren't even considered, because he takes for granted that Israel has the right to cage the people of Gaza and the people of the West Bank.
Yeah. And back to the point that I was making about right-wing media. I mean, you can tell who's controlled opposition and who is not. There are all these right-wing influencers who don't seem to be very talented. I just can't see what it is about them that makes them so compelling. like Charlie Kirk. This guy just came out of nowhere. He was cultivated to be one of the key Trump influencers. I don't even know how Trump knew who he was, but he came out through the David Horowitz Freedom Center with right-wing Zionist money. And then he's doing all these trips to Israel, hanging out with Im Tirtzu, which is basically the campus wing of Netanyahu's Likud operation, completely controlled. Then you have like the Manhattan Institute, a base of neoconservatism. That's where Chris Rufo comes from. And so many of these other figures. Who is this guy who was just on Joe Rogan, who I've never heard of? He's sort of like a black neoconservative that they're propping up.
Coleman Hughes.
Yeah, Coleman Hughes. He's like a
huge dupe of the Hamas mass rape story. He chided me for daring to challenge it back when it first came out. He said nothing since it all fell apart, by the way. But anyway.
Yeah, he's from the Manhattan Institute. They're like, okay, well, we need we're looking for black commentators to denounce DEI and be pro-Israel. We got a problem there. So here you go. Here's a guy who's like slightly more intelligent and less funny than Jesse Lee Peterson. I mean, it's all just the whole right as it's been constructed in the US is just like pseudo. Everything's fake. They have like all these fake think tanks that right-wing billionaires created. They have all these fake endowed scholars they're trying to get fake university presidents. I mean, not that they're not all kind of fake, but they're like trying to dislodge them with billionaire money. And then they just want to ram through their agenda. It's, it's an emulation of the establishment, but behind it all is tons and tons of Zionist money. It has to be said. So when Tucker Carlson is coming out on a platform that's harder to control, he has his own money, his own backers. He's kind of his own man. I'm not saying I obviously don't come from the same perspective as him, but he's moving. That is a huge threat. And it's not just a threat to the personalities of the right. It's a threat to the forces behind them. It's also a threat to the way that the Israel lobby has tried to influence the Christian church in America. Pastor John Hagee, one of the biggest Christian evangelical pastors, not because he's particularly insightful or spiritual, but because he has a ton of money. This big church in San Antonio is kind of a faith healer, Pentecostal. He's propped up by the Israel lobby. It was AIPAC that set up, I reported this back at the time in like 2007. They helped set up Christians United for Israel. When I went to their first conference, John Hagee had all of these PR agents running around trying to manage us who did not come from the Christian church or the Christian community. They were Jewish Zionist PR agents who worked for this Israeli thug named Ron Tarosian in New York, who was basically, just an Israel lobby guy. So who is John Hagee representing, really? And that's where I think this rebellion is coming from. It's also coming from just sincere outrage by Tucker or Candace Owens at just watching babies being butchered. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. How could you just watch that day after day and not be disgusted by what Israel is and what it's doing, or seeing the soldiers just taunt you on TikTok, just reveling in the bloodbath that they've created? I don't know. You have to be there. You have to be incentivized somehow to continue to go along with this and attack Tucker for simply interviewing Munther Isaac. And there is another point to make, I guess, about evangelical Christianity in the US here and the Christian right, which is something real about it since it emerged from the influence of Carnival Barker, John Nelson Darby, which is that they don't really see the Palestinian Christians of Nazareth or Bethlehem, where Jesus is from, who are direct descendants of the apostles, as Christian, because they were not born again in the blood of the Lamb, as you're supposed to be in evangelical American Christianity. They just see them as Arabs. They kind of have basically the evangelical mega church in the US is just a base of imperialism and there is an endemic racism there towards Palestinians. So I think this interview is a real breakthrough, not just for political reasons, but to hear Munther Isaac express the liberation theology perspective of an evangelical Lutheran pastor in Bethlehem who sees the cross as a symbol of the Calvary that Palestinians have experienced, the suffering of Jesus as akin to the suffering that Palestinians have experienced, I think will appeal to a lot of younger Christians in the US who are moving away from the imperial kind of Constantinian vision of the pastor John Hagees and the Franklin Grahams and the Jerry Falwell Juniors and all that corruption that comes with it. I think this was a real breakthrough, and there's nothing that can be done to stop it.
You know, the whole thing is part of a pattern. Like, who was the U.S. at war with in Central America in the 1980s? A lot of it was they were against the church, because the church in Central America was so often on the side of the poor. And governments that try, or movements that try to support the poor majorities of the country, that was a target of the U.S. So, for example, when Archbishop Romero was assassinated in El Salvador, those even U.S. nuns were assassinated, were killed, and there was some church solidarity in the U.S. with Central America, but not nearly enough, and the political class completely ignored them and supported their murders. Same thing with Syria. You know, who were the so-called moderate rebels slaughtering the rebels that were armed by the U.S. Via the CIA and their allies? Who were they targeting? It was minorities, including Christians. You know, I went to that church is the town called Malula in Syria? Is that what it's called? Yeah. Where that was taken over by Al Qaeda, and all the, you know, this historic church desecrated. You know, these U.S.-backed militants stealing relics from the church, putting it on the black market. No outrage whatsoever from these evangelical Christians in the U.S. and their representatives in Congress. And so this is like, even in Palestine, the birthplace of Jesus, it can't stir any moral outrage from these people.
Malula is the only place in the world. Yeah. Malula is the only place in the world where Aramaic is still spoken, and the town's residents were used as extras for Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, just because he needed Aramaic speakers. And you know who defeated Al Qaeda there? It was the Syrian army, local Christian militias, but Hezbollah played a key role there in saving that Christian community. And Israel, of course, is trying to destroy them. Efraim Rios Montt, the former dictator of Guatemala, he was an evangelical Christian who was coached by evangelical Christian leaders in the U.S. To counter figures, liberation theology figures like Archbishop Romero in El Salvador, who were seen as a threat to empire. And it, you know, this persists today. So this was, I think, a major intervention by Tucker. And, you know, people can change. It doesn't mean Tucker is going to change into some like left-wing progressive anti-imperialist who, you know, goes and delivers water to dying migrants on the border. I don't think that's going to happen. But we live in the U.S. I'm going to stay here and make whatever change I can. You know, and I'm going to, and I don't know. I remember some like dweebs attacking me for having dinner with Tucker once or something. Well, I mean, I don't really feel like I have anything to apologize for. I'll have dinner with anyone who wants to talk to me about Palestine and learn more about it. And they can feel free to run away and leave the U.S. But I'm going to be here, and I think things are changing. At least we're raising consciousness here in the heart of the empire, and that's something I'm proud of, and I'm happy to witness this change.